It's welcome back to 2023 to the Sportsfan Radio panel. And Dan Budley, Happy New Year for this year. Happy New Year for last year. First time back on the show for over 12 months. Welcome, sir.
I am so excited to be here. I have missed you guys. I have missed Sportsfan Radio and excited to be here, Mark. Thanks for letting me back.
Well, we may as well go straight to you, Dan. NFL, the divisional championship round. They were down to the last four teams, Kansas City and the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC. Is Patrick Mahomes fit on one ankle? And can they beat the hoodoo? The Bengals have got them 0-3 for the last three matches they've played.
Yeah, it's Cincinnati coming off an unbelievably great game at Buffalo last week in the snow. Everybody, I think, projected Buffalo to be in the Super Bowl, and Cincinnati took it to them. Obviously, we're a little frustrated that I think the NFL commissioner indicated that if Buffalo and Kansas City were to play in the championship, the AFC championship, that it would go to a neutral site. That motivated Cincinnati to go out and beat Buffalo, pretty staunchly last week. But obviously, everyone's eyes are on the Chiefs starting quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, who suffered the high ankle sprain in the win against Jacksonville last week. I think everybody in Kansas City stopped breathing to see how hard it would be to get him back. But despite the injury, the head coach, Andy Reid, told reporters on Friday that Mahomes will start Sunday and indicated that he's moving around good. So whether that's a coach's ploy to try to get the opposing defense to prep for Mahomes, it'll be a good question. But Mahomes obviously won't be at 100%, even though he may be moving around well. And another one is Travis Kelce is injured for Kansas City. So it's going to be interesting. Then the Bengals offensive line's banged up, but they were banged up last week when they beat Buffalo. So it is going to be a great match. Gelding, I saw you had a question.
Yeah, Dan, can you see Mahomes, what he's famous for is extending the plays by running out of the pocket, going to the sides and that. And, of course, he lost that ability, with a rather severe ankle injury. And as you said, the tight end, Kelce, was his main go-to man just to get those 10 yards. Do you see him playing in the pocket, or playing and doing what he normally does by roaming around, extending the plays? He even does some runs himself.
You're right. And I'll tell you, the way the Bengals played last week, they're going to try to force him out of the pocket and see if he can run on that ankle. Probably will be angling to tackle ankle high to try to see if they can get him out of the game in some ways. But I think, when you've got a high ankle sprain, those are usually 2 or 4 weeks to really heal properly, depending on how severe it is. That ankle sprain did not look very, very promising. The Chiefs are favored by 1.5 as the home team. But I'll tell you, guys, watch out for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they're on a mission again to get to that Super Bowl this year.
Well, they may be there to win it. But do you think this injury is as bad as it is? Or is it like the Joker's hamstring in the tennis?
It's a good one. When you say high ankle sprain versus ankle sprain, I would tell you it's as bad as it is. A high ankle sprain does not heal well. It's really up in the bone area. If they just said ankle sprain, I probably wouldn't be as concerned. But when they say high ankle sprain, it kind of tells me that that's more severe than just a normal tweaking of the ankle.
Have you been watching the Australian Open?
Just a bit. Obviously, we've talked about this before. As there's not a lot of American influence in the game right now, we don't watch the games pretty much overnight being played. So you don't wake up as an American and watch the Australian Open as much as we used to.
The Joker's got a bandage on that right hamstring that looks as if you're waiting for him to break down any minute, and then you'll see him stretched to the extreme limit. And all of us, having played some form of sport at a reasonable grade, will know if you've been like that, your hamstrings just pop like anything. So I just think it's the biggest con of all time. So there's a lot of these people that play injured, that aren't that badly injured.
And you wonder what kind of medication or anything like that they need to get out there on the court as well.
Dan, we're trying to help you Americans. We're trying to finish our matches about 4:00 in the morning. So it makes it more reasonable for the Americans to be able to actually watch the games. It's getting sort of silly. You may have seen the Andy Murray 5-setter that finished about past 4 in the morning. It's really getting ridiculous when the games are going that long.
John, what did you think of that when it started? Like at 10:30 or something, it started.
Yeah.
Why would you start a 5-set game at 10:30 at night?
Because you have to, because of the scheduling, Gelding, you have to. They wouldn't be able to put into the next day and throw the whole thing into chaos. And it have to be said that it's the exception rather than the every game.
Yeah.
If the women's game, which it could have done, went to 2 sets and the mixed doubles went to its regulation or 2 sets, or it could have finished by midnight. So it's difficult for the schedulers, but in the old days they didn't have lights. They had to play. The only restriction was daylight. So I think something needs to be done about the scheduling, but that's another story. And
imagine if they didn't play tiebreakers in the 5th set.
Well, yeah, John.
All right, gentlemen. I might drag us back to the NFL. We've wandered out into the Australian Open, but Dan, so Kansas City at home.
Yep.
Who have you got and why?
I in this game, I like the Bengals. I think just because of Mahomes' injury, I think he'll be slowed up a little bit. Kansas City, the crowd will be nuts, but I think again, Cincinnati's probably got the better overall team with Kelsey and Mahomes both injury mark. I just think Cincinnati takes this one. It's going to be close, but I tend to favor Cincinnati in this game.
All right, the other game, Dan, the Eagles at home, who have a fairly good offense against the 49ers, who are lights out in defense. So we've got the two opposing areas of the game clashing head on. Do you like Philadelphia at home, or can the 49ers pull off a bit of an upset?
Who is Brock Purdy, Mark Senior? Obviously this is the story of the year right now in the NFL. There's a lot of great stories. Obviously,
Game 7 or game 8?
But yeah, it's crazy. They have won 12 straight games. He has won 7 straight games as the starting quarterback. This is Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the 2022 NFL draft. This guy is a rookie, Mark Seymour. I do not understand who Brock Purdy is and why he's having all the success he's had. But obviously, they played the Dallas Cowboys last year. The Niners did. Played them last week. They won 19-12. Close game. I think the Cowboys probably could have won that if Dak didn't have the challenges and the kicker didn't have the challenges the Cowboys did. But in this game, I favor the Eagles. I think the Eagles' defense is much stronger than what the offense is for San Francisco. And in the NFL, you got to score to win. And I tend to think the Eagles will be able to do that against San Francisco. So I favor the home team in this one in Philadelphia.
By how many?
It's favored by 2.5. I anticipate it's probably going to be more than 2.5, in my opinion. I mean, generally these bookmakers are very good at understanding the score, so they're anticipating it's going to be a 2 or 3 point game. But I tend to think it's going to be at least a touchdown.
Dan, let me tell you, the professor has been on fire picking the NFL this year. In our little bets on another show, he has been picking the lights out of them. And this week was a bit wayward because he thought the game to be very, very close, all within a field goal type of scenario.
Well, the lines seem to indicate that, Gelding. So if Mark is leading the lines, that seems to be the direction they're heading.
Gelding, Dan, the bookies do very well, except there was one glitch. The Bills at home to the Dolphins, where the Bills were 13.5, minus 13.5, and they won by a field goal. So the bookies have got a fair bit to make up, because anybody who took the line and the Dolphins was smiling.
You are correct on that one. I think everybody was caught off guard when the Dolphins went. It was crazy to see that one. But as they say, any given Sunday, you just never know who's going to show up.
So,
Professor, something like that, anyone that backed the Dolphins on the line in that game would give their money back the following week doing another silly bet.
all right, Gelding. Now, so Dan, you've got the Cincinnati Bengals and the Philadelphia Eagles playing in the Super Bowl.
In the Super Bowl, correct. That's who I've got at this point.
Want to give us a long-range forecast?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. So Cincinnati obviously lost the Super Bowl last year, so against the Rams. So I'm anticipating Cincinnati again. If they play the way they played against the Bills, I think Cincinnati is going to be tough to beat.
Well, what does that make Dan Burrows worth as a quarterback? What does that make Burrows worth as a quarterback then?
It's going to make it
As
worth
he
a lot.
comes out of contract.
Grew up in Ohio. He's playing for the Ohio team. I think obviously he's got a lot of star power in that state, and I don't think Cincinnati would want to lose him in any respect. They've got the salary cap to make it happen.
All right, last question on the NFL, Dan, and it's a question without notice, and you know how much we love these on Sportsfan. Brett Favre Mark II. The Green Bay Packers are reliving what happened with their previous great quarterback. And will Rodgers play with the Packers next season or not?
Oh,
This is a great question. I know you're a Packers fan, so I'd love to get your answer on this one versus me answering it. But I think he's gone. I think, this is an opportunity for the Packers to cut bait. They did not make the playoffs this year, Mark. I don't think they're going to make it with him as quarterback, given the age and the wear and tear at this point. I mean, he has obviously been a great quarterback over the years, but I think this is the year that he looks elsewhere. It could be the Raiders, could be any other team out there, but I think the Packers will look to cut bait.
Could be the Jets. He could follow Favre's path to the Jets.
no, the Raiders need him.
Well, I tell you, Dan, as far as I'm concerned, if you had have asked me last year, I would have been upset him going. This season, I think let's move on.
I'll tell you, Mark, and as a Denver Broncos guy, I don't know if I would rather have Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers going into this past season. The Broncos were so bad with Russell, and they paid him, $200 and something million before he played this season for the Broncos. So it will be crazy to see who will overpay for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, well, it's a way to get a few first-round draft picks as well. In any event, let's move on. Australian Open being played as we speak. Cooter, I'm going to throw to you. How have you seen the Open to date?
Good afternoon. Dan, you said that the Americans have been looking for tennis players. Well, they had 4 in the quarterfinals of the men's, and are rising. The American men are rising again, on the back of so Seb Corder obviously comes from royalty. You had a young man by the name of Shelton, who never left America to play tennis. Tommy Paul beat him in a great 4-set match. So I think you're underselling yourselves a little bit. I wish I was able to say Australian tennis was in a good spot, but we'll talk about that afterwards. The women's final last night, Professor, is probably one of the best in years. And it's amazing to think that the best match of the tournament is the final. So many times the final will be a letdown. We often talk about the fact that semi-finals are normally probably the best because they're so hard to make a final. But certainly the final last night between the two girls, what I would say would be genuine power hitting at its. It was just brutal last night. And we had Sabalenka, who 12 months ago, and it's been shown a little bit, actually couldn't serve. She served underarm at the Australian Open. She served double fault after double fault, and 12 months on, she's here and she's holding up which I would think, if you have a look at it, it's one of the best looking trophies in the world, the Daphne Anderson. So last night was a brilliant final, 3 sets, 2.5 hours, and I think we got the final we probably deserved.
Just on the serving, sorry, but I was interested by the difference in the serving styles between the two finalists last night. Rybakina lifts the racket just straight up and then serves from there. In other words, no real backswing, if you like. Sabalenka has got the full. If you were coaching someone how to do a tennis serve, I would think you go with the Sabalenka serve. I think it's a magnificent piece of machinery, the way she does it. So it's just interesting that they deserted her a year ago. And I couldn't work it out last night just because it's such a glorious action.
Judge, the serve actually didn't desert her. Serve was a struggle. So
Yeah.
She wasn't able to get the spin on the ball that she wanted. Everything was flat, the ball toss. So mechanically, it wasn't a great serve. Whereas now, you're right, you look at it, there's still some issues around it, is that she can't get the kick or the top spin serve that others do have. Now, last night, I think she served 17 aces and she had 6 double faults. Now, I know which stat I think 11 difference there is 3 free games. And at the end of it, the serve was the dominating factor. Unfortunately for Rubikina, who started her campaign on court 17, we've got to remember that this girl won the Wimbledon last year, and she started the tournament on court 17, which I'm not sure that's the respect that a Grand Slam winner in the 12 months does deserve. But anyway, we're not tournament directors. We're not CEOs of Tennis Australia. We're not in the hip pocket of Rod Laver. If you want to see the tightest tag in the history of the world, look at the president and Rod Laver. But she hits the ball well. You would not know she played a match last night. After 2.5 hours, I don't think she was sweating. There was no emotion. There was no anger or anything like that. The final was played in good spirits. There was some dickheads in the crowd, but you get that at every tennis match these days, I think. But no, certainly a cracking final. And I'll say I think that if Ash Barty had continued on, I would think that she'd probably win a Grand Slam. And when we talk Grand Slams, that is that she'd win all 4. Last night, the ball was just hit the same pace. There was no variation, no serve volley. There was no slice backhands and just the ability to move your opponent around. But she's not, and we've now got, I think we've got a future star in Sabalenka, and she'll be there for many years to come.
David, you answered my question. I was going to ask you, 12 months post Ash Barty, how do you think she would have gone? But you've answered that, because I watched last night, and to me, it was just a power game, a woman's power game. You know, as you said, belt the living hell out of the ball and belted it. There was the occasional drop shot, and that was about it. It was either that or, you know, we'll belt from backcourt to backcourt to backcourt and doing that. There was no kind of finesse of tennis, as you said, serve volley, drop shot. Should they change it up?
And I think,
or is that just the way tennis is going?
Hang on. Oh, what's happening?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, howdy, gents.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Giraffe.
Happy New Year, everyone. Can I just say as well, just on that comment about the baseline tennis, we've got to draw a parallel to the men's game where Tsitsipas was asked what Philippoussis has brought to the box, and he's tried to introduce serve volley, which I love going back to the Rafter era, but that certainly doesn't appear in his game because Tsitsipas himself said he never uses it. So it does seem to be a power game on both sides of the men's and women's tennis world, Kuda.
I actually thought the men's, there was more, I thought there was more volleying in the men's than what we've seen for some time. And when I say that, I refer to like Seb Corder. Has a terrific all-court game, and he actually started volleying a little bit more. Tsitsipas doesn't serve volley. He serve volleys on break point down at times. So when I say that, he kicks the ball out wide and tries to narrow the angle down to the return. The fact that Philippoussis is singing his box, I thought it was to calm the dad down.
He did say it was part of it, but geez, it makes me feel old seeing the human toothbrush. Peter Corder's got a son old enough to be getting around. I remember when he jumped in the Yarra, seems like 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, he floated.
I just find it funny, Philippoussis and his dad being in the team to calm him down.
It's quite the irony, isn't it? That
are they going to get Bernie Tomic's dad in soon to help with the picking the right milkshakes?
So, I think the men's has been okay. I don't think it's been outstanding. We've already mentioned about Djokovic and where he currently is. I can't see him being beaten tonight. He might drop a set, but I think he'll win it pretty easily. He's a polarizing character. Is Novak. His dad, obviously. What do you say? The parents of tennis players, they just continue to do the right thing, don't they? They really just, yeah. Anyway,
Well, they've called in the lip readers on that just to see, because apparently he might have said something quite just non-confrontational at all, just good luck, gents, or something. But there's a lip reader there, and it's not something of my specialty on my CV about Serbian lip reading. But apparently the words he said might not have been as confrontational, but I wouldn't bet against it.
Just a question to Dan. Dan, has any of that or any of those headlines about Djokovic's father reached the US, or is it just a big beat up in Australia?
No, it really is well known. I mean, I think we've known it for a while in that respect. It's not talked about probably as much as what you're seeing because you're hosting the tournament right now, but obviously you know that story a bit, the antics and the things that go on there.
Okay.
yeah, and Dan, going on further with that is that, like, what happened 12 months ago with Djokovic, he might be partly to blame, but he didn't go to America because he knew straight away that he was never going to get in. The circus that was created last year detracted from the tennis. Now, Damon and I made some comments the other night. Now, I don't think he was actually having a dig at Djokovic, but it's been portrayed that he was. Now, what happened last year was it took away from the tennis by having a bloke, number one in the world, sitting in quarantine in a hotel that also had other people, immigrants there, or illegal immigrants, I would say, or detainees, sorry. And that's what took away from it. Now, well, coming back out of COVID, I think everyone was looking forward to the Grand Slam. We had that circus. So 12 months on, they were worried about booing. Now, I don't think anyone was ever going to boo Djokovic. I personally, I don't understand why he would boo him, because what happened last year, I don't think was all his fault. So here he is, he comes back and he's got a hamstring issue that I don't think we'll know the full extent of. It's not quite like Nick Kyrgios, who actually got his physio to go to the press conference with him to explain what his actual injury was.
Is it as bad as Buddy Franklin's hamstring strain that lasted 6 months?
Who's?
Buddy Franklin, when he was allegedly on a strike, he had a hamstring strain. They described it for about 6 months, I think. So is it similar to that type convenient excuse to maybe buy himself some time during games? And that might have been what De Minaur doubled down on, that he said that he exaggerates his injuries. That combined with being one of the leading, I guess, vocal critics of his COVID antics might have been why Djokovic, like a serial killer, said he enjoyed beating him.
Wow. Okay.
Now, David, with everyone's played a reasonable level of sport here and that, and knows the hamstrings, and the way that he's stretching that hamstring with the biggest bandage of all time, it's just like putting four things around Farlap leaks just to say he's, he may have an injury in that. It hasn't stopped him one bit, has it?
He certainly changed some of the style. He certainly changed some things.
Some of the photos sees him stretching pretty hard.
Yeah, so the stretching, I don't quite understand, because he actually does more than that. So De Minaur is probably the number one when it comes to that sort of stretching, or the sliding, I should say, sorry.
Yeah.
But the other night, like, he was sliding both ways. So it wasn't just the forehand, it was also the backhand. You're thinking,
and if he got a hamstring, it goes ping. So the heavy bandage, I reckon it's just one of the best cons of all time. He's done.
And those tablets that Djokovic pops, what's in those? I bet they're not just
or the magic drink coming down from the coach's box.
Yep.
Can I just ask you further about the if Ash Barty had played? I think your view is that if she were still playing and at her best, she could take the Grand Slam. I think that's what you were saying.
No doubt, absolutely no doubt.
Really interesting, because before this discussion, I was just wondering about the future of the serve and volley, because it just seems to be a part of the game. You and I are old enough to remember when it was the major part of the game. If you couldn't do it, you couldn't win. But now there's very few players that are of that ilk.
Well, the other night, Judge, I'm not sure if you did get to see it, but was the McEnroe movie or the documentation or the documentary on McEnroe. Now, that's from a different era, but you had players like McEnroe, they had Borg, Connors. You go through that whole era and the serve volley, but it just wasn't serve volley. It was everything else that went with it. It was actually the finesse that sort of Gelding mentioned before. It was the tactics of being able to pin players down. And no, we certainly don't have that serve volley. Like, who was the last serve volleyer of any note? Was maybe Zverev's brother. But before that, are you looking to Pat Rafter?
Are we hoping Corder Jr. can bring some of it back?
Well, he won't be a full-time serve volleyer going, but what he does is he actually knows when to move to net and actually make that move forward. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the balls at the Australian Open this year. Obviously, we saw Nadal get injured, but he's been pretty critical around the balls that were being used. And then to find out that they've signed an extension with Dunlop. So, yeah, I would like to think there'd be more volleying. There'll never be serve volleying. I think that's just it's an era that's gone. But I think there'll be more of that case where you ride the big shot. So the forehand, you ride that in, volley away, shorten the points in that regard. The issue you've got with, say, Djokovic is that he's the best defender of all time. So when I say defender, is that defensively, when he's off guard, he can still play deep balls, put you back on the defence yourself by hitting it within a foot of the baseline or sideline. And he loves a target at net. So the ability for you to serve volley against someone like Djokovic, he loves that target. And that's where it's hard.
Peter, I just can't believe that humans have advanced so far in the last 20 years to justify the increase in the power. The speed of the serve, the speed of the ball during the rally is exponential. It's not natural increase. And you look at the trajectory of where the game's going, it's going towards a power game. And that's why Ash Barty might in fact be an anomaly rather than an example of what we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on that, Cooter, if I can. Did you agree with the comment last night where, I don't know which commentator it was, but they said this is a new standard, a new bar has been set for women's tennis, which I presume includes the fact that Ash is gone, but it seemed to imply that there's a new standard set last night, better than has ever been seen.
I wouldn't agree with that, because I would have thought that you'd be talking about Serena Williams. Serena Williams is the one that changed tennis, and Venus to a certain extent as well. The brutality of the way that Serena played, big serve, big forehand, and then a backhand that also allowed her to dominate. Like maybe it's a new era because we've had the retirement, although she's not retired yet, but we've had the retirement of Serena, Ash, Ozaki we haven't talked about, but I doubt whether she comes back and plays. So there is this new era that might be coming, Paul. So maybe but I can't. Serena Williams changed the way tennis is played.
Exactly. Yeah.
So her brutality came in. She won X amount of Grand Slams. She won't get the record judge. We know that, or we believe she won't. And then you had other players around her that tried to lift themselves. But no, certainly maybe it is. It's a different era that's coming up. And the two girls that made the final, they did hit the ball well. You had Jess Pegula, I think that's how you pronounce it, Dan, from America, who made the semi. She was a number 3 seed. Iga Swiatek, who was the top seed and who people thought she just wiped the floor at the Grand Slam. She plays differently. She doesn't necessarily have the power of the two girls from last night, but she's a bit robotic and makes everything. And you got one of the rising stars in world tennis in Coco Goff, who from again, Dan from America, we kept talking about America. You can see that the improvement from probably 12 to 24 months has been huge. Madison Keys. So you've got a good high number of girls, or women, I should say, that could possibly be number one in the world. One thing, Professor, I'm not sure whether or not this year the results were a bit different, was that it seemed to me that a lot of players were underdone. It seemed that it was a summer of sort of, yeah, we had the United Nations or United Cup, whatever it was, Nations Cup, whatever it was. We had a couple of weeks in Adelaide, but it just seemed that we didn't have the best players playing at all those tournaments. And then we had the Kooyong Classic as well, or the whatever it's called these days. So I just wonder whether or not some players were slow building up to the start of the year, because it is a long season. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward, that's for sure.
Just on the power game comment, I'd noticed that Shelton, who's probably the best of the Americans coming through, served at over 200 and often 220. He's not a big guy. Normally that's the sort of 6'4" plus guys, but to be serving at 220, that's got to be partly due to technology, if not largely.
I think with him, it's certainly technology, but he does have a really nice and easy action. His style of play is something that is enjoyable to watch. A classical left-hander. He has that serve out wide. And as I said, Paul, for a bloke that's not played any tournaments outside of America, he's certainly one to watch. The grass, I think, would suit him with that nice style. He's also got a bit of volley about him as well. So, the serving over 200 is big. And then last night, I think there are a couple of returns or a couple of forehand winners that were at 150 plus as well. So, if you can imagine a tennis ball coming at 150, then you're lucky not to be an emergency, I would have thought.
Well, the fastest woman's serve, by the way, is 210 kilometres per hour 10 years ago. Serena's number 5 at 207. So I agree, Cooter. The women's game is just probably sponsored or promoted by Serena. Is just getting way more powerful. It's actually incredible that they are getting close to the men's speeds.
Well, and I think, if we talk about golf, and I know that we've talked about it before, Professor, with Morty, is that the women's game is relatable in golf.
Yep.
So it's the distances that they hit and where they hit it, and it's relatable, whereas the men's is now seriously, it's just bombing. It is absolutely bombing, and the ball goes so far. Some of the courses just can't keep up with them. Now they're sticking bunkers in and making it so that they're challenging players. So, yeah, again, with the women's game, Judge, I thought it was a good final. I didn't think it was the best of tournaments. I don't think it was the most memorable tournament from that regard. But I certainly think the final is something that we can reflect upon and say that it was a terrific final, and that the two best players and certainly got there at the end.
All right,
Gilding, can we get a price up on Tsitsipas? I'll call it now. I think he wins tonight. I'll call it.
Tsitsipas?
Yep, I think he wins in 4 or 5 sets, probably 5.
Beautiful. What do you want on it?
What price are you giving me?
Hey, I'm sure David and I will have the Joker.
Yeah.
I think, you can have him, but you're not going to get smaller. You're going to get very small.
Maybe we'll talk off air, Giraffe.
I think Djokovic is due, and I don't mind a bit of heat in the kitchen. There's a bit of heat between these two. Not that Djokovic is the Dalai Lama on tour, but there seems to be some particular heat between Tsitsipas and Djokovic. I think you'll find his voice, and I'll have a souvlaki about midnight to celebrate.
All right, Cooter, it was a memorable tournament for two Australians, though, Kubler and Hijikata, who won the doubles. So that's the second year in a row that an Australian pair has won the Australian Open doubles. They've seemed to have come from nowhere.
Well, they got a wild card into the tournament. For me, it was a pretty, congratulations to them. But it was a pretty ordinary final. The opponents last night, well, I actually don't know how they made the final. Yeah, having watched a lot of doubles over the years, and watching dominant pairs, the pairs in the final last night, good luck to them. They won, made it through, but jeepers, that the pair that they played, I don't know. It was just a weird final. Yeah.
So
Is that the way doubles going, David, though? Like, we've had, in years gone past, you've had specialist doubles players that, Woodbridges, and they stayed out of the singles.
Yep.
You had the Americans. Now it just seems, we'll get together for one or two tournaments. If it doesn't work, we'll get someone else.
Well, the pairs that played last night, so Rinky and Jason Kubler, they just joined up before the final, before the tournament, which is great. Like, good luck to them. They got a wild card in, 2 Australians, rode the wave. They played smart doubles, served well, made balls, and their energy on court was terrific. The opponents last night, they are professional doubles players. They don't play singles. But if you had have watched it, you would have thought...
I was going to say, Cooter, I'm glad you weren't doing the post-match presentation. And to the runners-up tonight, give them their little plate or whatever it was they got. And, thanks. And on to the winners.
I think they received pretty good money. I don't think it was like...
Yeah.
But honestly, if you watched it, you would wonder who they beat to get there. They missed volleys. They didn't serve well. They didn't put much pressure on the Aussies. Match point is an indication of how badly these people played.
Cooter, is there an argument to put the doubles in the mix on a different weekend, different week? Because then you get your better players, your top players, see players actually playing doubles, or do you like it the way it is?
Yeah, I think it's great for the tournament. I think that the 2 weeks is brilliant. If we're going to talk about the Australian Open is a festival of tennis. Craig from Tennis Australia, the CEO of Tennis Australia, but also tournament director, him and his team. There is a team behind him, I'm led to believe, Judge, but I could be wrong. They've turned it into a day out for the families now. Obviously, centre court, I think your pricing on centre court starting to get too high. You're paying over $200 a ticket to go. And geez, you get some ranked tennis on centre court. Like, you get some absolute bunnies playing. And like we talked about long matches before, but gee, there's been some short ones. So from that regard, but the ground passes, the price went up every day, right? So I don't know what it started off at, but the Friday, I went the first Friday, and the ground pass was $75. Now that gets you entry in, and you can sit on some outside courts, but you can't get into obviously Rod Laver or Margaret Court Arena. You can get into John Cain and Kia. And kids' tickets were $15 each. So for me, it cost $105 to walk in, and then the offerings of beverages and food, you may not leave there anything short of $200. Now, it's a pretty expensive day out if you don't take your own stuff in with you.
David, is it becoming? It's just become like the Spring Carnival, isn't it? It's an event for the celebrities that seem to get all the good seats, and to be seen in the marquee areas of the things and get their photo on page 13 of papers and things like that. It's just becoming a bit of a knobs event, isn't it?
Yeah,
as you said, those grand passes used to be $20 a day to get people just to come and watch the early kind of events. Now it's just, that's like the races during the spring. They're just out costing themselves unless you're a corporate or a celebrity.
Well, as we know, Tennis Australia needs the money. And this is a big chance to clean up on the 2-week festival of tennis, as we heard. So I think as long as they can get more money, they will go for it.
There you
There's a
go.
very good article about it. It's the number one international sporting event in terms of promotions. I mean, it costs $1 million just to get anywhere near sponsoring, and the biggest sponsor is a Chinese liqueur that no one's heard of, or Kia, obviously as well up there. But in terms of corporate sponsorship, it's number one, and I presume that's the prestige of the event and the international exposure. So the money's flowing in.
Yeah, but I think that's because China wants to get the event. They want the Asian area Grand Slam to be there rather than Australia. So, that's a different point altogether. But yeah, look, it'll be, as David said, he's walked in taking his nephew, I presume, and just to get something to eat and something to drink without having a big day. You're probably 300 out of pocket, and that's without being able to get a seat.
People are still voting with their feet, and even with all the big name withdrawals and lack of Australians, what I'm saying that people are smart enough next year. It just keeps growing though, so people seem to want to keep paying it.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, we might call it time there. Time is moving on. We won't get to anything else we were going to discuss in the show. Thanks, David. Much appreciated. And I take it that you're going for the Joker to beat Tsitsipas in 4.
I think it'll be in 4 sets, Professor. And let's hope there's some controversy tonight. Tsitsipas probably might have some bladder issues tonight, so he'll head off the court a few times.
What do you reckon? Halfway during the second set, when he's down to, looks like losing the first 2 sets?
Yeah, I won't say it's a coincidence that happens, Golding, but he might have a break and just have some medical timeouts. Now, Professor, the final point is that, and I never got an answer on this. When you take in a condition or an injury into the tournament, how do you get an injury timeout? Now, that was used by Mr. Djokovic.
Who will use it again tonight if he's down?
If he's
I
able
wish
to.
Sportsbet had a market on how many timeouts he has. More timeouts than an NBA match.
But I think, Professor, at the end of the day, I think Djokovic will win. This could be Craig Tiley's swan song, getting him to win. And our president, she might leave the side of Rod Laver tonight. I'm not sure. She did leave his side to spend some time with Elbow. Sorry. So yeah, hopefully tonight's a good final, and it's a good way to end the 2 weeks.
All right. Moving on to NRL. Paul, has the new team that's going to kick off this season signed any marquee player?
I was going to say, when you're calling it into the tennis talk, because that's our new balls, please. But I'm more than happy to pick up the ball and run for you, Professor. They'll be okay. They've got a man called Wayne Bennett in charge. Someone came out and pretty unwisely said he hasn't got it. I think he's still got the ability to get the most out of the team he's got. He's number one, the most important player is Sean O'Sullivan, who's come through the Panthers ranks. Can't get a game because a guy called Nathan Cleary's there. They do have some talent there. I think they'll be all right. I don't think they'll threaten the 8, but they won't be a laughing stock like the early days of the Suns and the GWS Giants. They won't be that bad.
Surely he'll have a 3-year plan, won't he, before, like any new franchise kind of club to come in. He will have a plan to build them, won't he?
Well, can I tell you this? It's almost a ludicrous situation. Salary caps have to be a minimum % of the salary cap total. So they're actually going to be calling the boys in, and it's happening as we speak, and front loading their contracts. So they're going to say, listen, we know we were going to pay you 300. Well, how about 400? And I can imagine if I was a player, I'd say, I'll think about it. Yes, I will. Yeah. But what that's going to do is reduce the contract next year to give him a treasure chest that Aladdin would be proud of. So they're going to get through next year. They'll be fine. I don't think they'll be a laughing stock. And they'll have, the biggest war chest since World War II for 2024. And there's a lot of gun players coming off contract at the end of next year. So I would think the second year is the year that we assess them on. And before that time, they will have landed an absolute superstar. And there's quite a few players biding their time, I think, with that in the back of their mind. There's also, I'll jump straight into it, Professor, a broader issue I don't know if they've still got Dan online, but we're a chance of having a players' strike, much like the baseball did. The mail is they probably won't have this sorted with the season ready to go unless Peter V'landys waves some of his magic. But it's a tough one. You've got seasoned journalists not wanting to comment on who's right and who's wrong. You have the standard arguments coming out for the players that it's not about the superstars. It's a short career. They're looking after the younger players. They want more money for development. They want more money for grassroots. They want better insurance. So it's not just the players on $1 million a year wanting more. The clubs are more than happy with what's going on. It's the NRL that apparently doesn't want to budge. And I think what it's to do with is they want to save some money for the future. Whereas the players are saying we're the ones who are putting in now. It should be coming more to the players. It's incredibly contentious, but on a practical level, it may delay the whole season.
Paul,
How do you think how would that affect the season, Paul? I mean, how would that affect the attitude of the fans in that respect? I mean, if you remember baseball when they went on strike in the mid-'90s, I mean, what saved them was Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa coming out with a home run derby with the juice balls and everything else. I don't know if Major League Baseball had a part in that or not, but obviously that juicing era definitely helped baseball come back. How does NRL deal with that?
Yeah, I think without taking a stance, I think the players have more sympathy now with the onset of the concussion issues. People are realising these aren't just pampered players who do their job for 2 hours a week. They realise how tough the game is, how much they put in. It is a full-time job. You have a few beers and it shows up on a skin fold test the next day. So they are devoting their life to this sport, and the average career is only about 3 or 4 years. So I don't think the players are being perceived as greedy as such. They are being quite militant, and that's what a players' union's for. I think there is some disenchantment with perhaps Peter V'landys, and that I think he's got to be careful not to come across as being too rigid, and it has to perhaps be a bit more conciliatory, which might not be his strong suit. And I'm sure some of the panelists will comment on that.
How can the leopard change the spots, Giraffe? He will bulldoze them.
Can a lion coming out of a cage engage in conciliatory talks? That's probably a better expression. You'd have to say no. So this could get very nasty because he's famous for being a bulldozer, but this situation doesn't need a bulldozer. It needs some calmer heads. And
the more it goes against him, the more stubborn he'll get.
Yeah, and that's not going to end well because the players have a very, very good point. And even if it is the superstars saying we'd like a greater share, or you tell us where it's going because we think it's management largesse, or we think that you're prioritising the future too much over the current players who are literally putting their brains and lives on the line for this game.
And Dan, just to make that equation with the play strike in baseball, you're right that the game changed because the Major League Baseball actually changed the ball, and they had far more home runs. And they did it again a few years ago, about 7 years ago, and the home runs have increased. You can't change NFL in the same extent. The AFL changes rules every second year to try and make the game more interesting, but it's just not going to happen that way. And I think NFL's got a real problem in attracting fans if this strike actually happens.
NRL, yeah. Yep.
NRL, absolutely.
No, it really is a difficult one, and as I said, it's rare to see seasoned journalists not commenting on it because it's so much at stake, so much involved. People almost don't want to be perceived to take a stand on it. They can report on where things are at, but I think the players are a bit bemused, and perhaps this goes down to Peter V'landys, is he's left it so late, and he probably presumes he can barge through and with his tie not done up properly, can just get a deal done. And I think that might be some false confidence on his part.
Paul, the other thing that is very noticeable around the pay dispute is the impact of the women's as well, and how it's all being done together. Now, from an AFL perspective, we obviously heard from the president of the AFL Players Association, which is Patrick Dangerfield. Now, there was minimal discussion or weight put on the women's bargaining or bargaining agreement, what do you want to call it? But that is one of the major points that the players and the committee or the board for the Players Association are holding in high opinion, aren't they?
They don't even have insurance locked in, and there's all-star representative type games coming up to open the women's season, and they don't even have insurance put in place. Now the NRL's come out and said it is in place, but nothing's been seen. There needs to be some evidence of that. I think there's some bravado from NRL head office that everything's going so well with the game, which it is, that they presume everything will be fine. But the players are the ones taking a more cautious approach. There's women refusing to play games, understandably, without insurance in place because it can affect your livelihood.
Oh, as we've seen, Paul, and like you raised the point that the average lifespan of a player is sort of 3 to 5 years now. That's so small compared to what they've got to put up with after their careers are finished, and the education, everything like that, and the transition to playing. So I just think that the NRL has done a great job with the women's game. They've gradually grown it and they're making it sustainable. So they've introduced new teams, whereas AFL women, they're now at a maximum of 18 teams, did the standard drop off possibly, and they just did it. They said, we've got to get it done. Whereas the NRL are certainly doing it a lot more measured. But at the same time, I think that from a player's perspective and from I call the NRL it's the whole lot. And that's the way that the players are treating it.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some more focus on it, because all this talk, and it's truth, about how well the women's game's going, but there needed to be the proper processing behind the scenes of arrangements for the actual people who are making it work. So it's no different to any other sport around the world that's played with these type issues. When there's more money suddenly comes into the game, it's not necessarily a positive unless you can sort things out, because it can lead to division, which it has. And it's everyone wanting a fair share of a bigger pie. But for the women, they just want to be looked after with the most basic of things like insurance. So it is not a great, it's an indictment on the NRL, the way it's been handled to date. And I think, again, it goes to the top with this bullishness, which doesn't always work.
All right, thanks, Paul. No doubt that will play out over coming weeks, but there's one thing we do know, and that is that the start of the season is certainly racing towards the NRL, so something has to be done, and done very quickly.
Yep.
Dan, we might come back to you just for a look at basketball in the US. We haven't spoken about that on the show for, 12 months. The NBA and college. Let's have a look at the college first. In the rankings, Dan, there are a few teams there that I haven't noticed in the top 25 before.
Yeah, you're hearing obviously the Houstons, the Purdue's, the UConns, Florida Atlantic, some of those teams that aren't necessarily used to the Dukes, North Carolinas, Kentucky's up there, but you're seeing some changeover. Obviously, Coach Krzyzewski's no longer at Duke, and John Calipari's having been struggles at Kentucky. So Texas just fired their coach a few weeks ago. So again, it seems like Tennessee and some others are now starting to come back around to programs that they were back probably in the 80s and 90s. So you've got some new teams. You looked at a projected Final Four, you probably wouldn't recognize the teams that were in that Final Four, Mark. It is an interesting dynamic in college basketball.
Well, yeah, I was looking at it and seeing Alabama at number 2 in the rankings. I'm more used to seeing Alabama at number 2 in the rankings for football.
Absolutely. I think they lost today, so it might have jinxed them today. But yeah, Alabama, Arkansas, some of these teams that have been in the top 25 aren't your normal. They're usually the football powerhouses, not necessarily the basketball. It always seems in college athletics, if you're good at football, really, really good at football, you're not necessarily really good at basketball. But if you're really good at basketball, you're not really good at football. But this year, it seems to be a little bit different dynamic.
So for the Big West, who are the teams to watch?
The Gauchos at UC Santa Barbara are the team to beat right now in the Big West on the men's side, playing exceptionally well. Really, I think they've lost 2 games all season at this point, starting to get votes in the top 25 polls, which is great for us. UC Irvine, the Anteaters at UC Irvine are up there as well. The Highlanders at UC Riverside and the University of Hawaii. Those are probably our top 4 men's programs at this point.
And how would they go against some of the more established teams in the top 10?
I think they'd probably battle, knowing how good and strong those top programs, Mark. I think our teams would battle for probably 30, 35 minutes. And then just the power that those teams have at the top 25 would be a little bit of a challenge. I think UC Santa Barbara stacks up probably the best against any team that is outside the conference. At this point, that would be top ranked, and I think right now they're probably the leader to get that number one seed in the Big West tournament.
Okay, and then a quick look at the NBA. Very happy to see that my Knicks actually beat the Celtics yesterday.
Yeah, crazy enough. I mean, obviously the Celtics played exceptionally well this year. It seems very interesting that the East seems to be dominated by bigger market teams, whereas the West is being dominated by smaller market teams. So the New York Knicks, Mark, I don't want to jinx it, but it looks like a team that could make the playoffs, could be one of those top 8 teams to make the playoffs at this point in the East. But obviously Boston and Brooklyn and Milwaukee and the Sixers are the top 4 teams right now in that division.
And the interesting part with the Knicks has been obviously the recruitment of Jalen Brunson. His recruitment seems to have sort of been a bit of a glue that sort of is stuck, like Randall, Barrett, Robinson and those together. And so that now, as you sort of said, they should be a playoffs team and bringing basketball back to New York.
Yeah. Dan, the other thing I wanted to look at was the Houston Rockets on the bottom of the West, 11 wins only for the season. They were a playoff team only a couple of seasons ago. What's happened to them?
Obviously, you lose James Harden, you lose some players to free agency, and then you get injuries stacking up. It is crazy, Mark. You look at 2 of the teams that have been perennial teams in the playoffs, San Antonio Spurs and the Houston Rockets probably aren't even sniffing right now at the playoffs. Obviously, Houston definitely not sniffing at the playoffs. And you also look at the Los Angeles Lakers in the West with LeBron and that team that was supposedly supposed to be one that give everybody a second chance to get that championship. I don't think the Lakers make the playoffs this year either.
So famous for asking you for a long range prediction. Who will be the 2 teams battling it out in the NBA playoffs, the top 2?
I like the Boston Celtics and the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm going to go big market versus small market. So Boston obviously playing exceptionally well. I just like John Morant. With Memphis, I think their team is pretty well balanced. And looking at the rest of their schedule right now, they'd probably be the number 1 in the West.
What about the Nuggets, Dan? Your old stamping ground, the Nuggets.
Yeah, I'm a Nuggets fan, and obviously they've got the best player in the NBA right now. But I think the Denver Nuggets ended up probably being the number 2 seed. If you look at far off projections, I think Memphis maybe gets ahead of them a game or 2 to get that number 1 seed overall. And then you kind of look at the teams that Denver could play in the playoffs. As with anything in basketball, it comes down to who you match up against. And I just think that long-term projections have probably Memphis and Denver in the Western Conference Finals. But I still think Memphis is probably just a notch ahead at this point.
Dan, one of the things this year, or it seems to be, is player management and injuries. Is that we're sort of saying there's a lot of back-to-back games and they're talking about when it's a divisional game, they will play their stars and they might. Is this a new thing? Is it, or has this been saying it's been happening since the bubble or the like? Because at the moment, it just seems that you may not know who you're going to be playing, as in personnel-wise.
Yeah, it definitely has been something just before the bubble, Cooter, in that respect. I think I remember games that you look at whether LeBron was going to play in Denver, when Denver wasn't as good as they are now, whether LeBron was going to take a day off. And it's really frustrating to be a fan in the NBA, particularly when you're looking at that long term. You may buy that mini pack of tickets that gets you 8 games, and you pick the Lakers thinking that LeBron's going to be playing in that game, or Cleveland or wherever he's playing at that point, and then to find he's going to sit out because he just wants a day off. That's really frustrating for fans, but it's definitely something that was happening just before the bubble, before COVID hit. And obviously as these bigger names, get older, I think you're going to see that continue to happen.
And you mentioned LeBron, Dan. He's had an amazing month. The talk is that within the next sort of month, he'll pass the record for the most points scored in the history of the NBA. Now, that's a massive stat, and he continues to play pretty well for his age.
Absolutely. I mean, the man is a physical specimen. There's no doubt he takes care of himself, takes care of his body, both mind and his business enterprises. He focuses on basketball and he does an exceptional job at it. He may not have had the best Space Jam movie, but he's definitely able to play at the age of 38 years old. He's playing at the very top of the game.
Well, Dan, you brought that up. Could I get a rating from you about the two Space Jam movies out of 10?
Oh, it's definitely the original Space Jam is definitely a 10. The music and everything that went with that one was just unbelievably good, and it was creative. It was fun to watch, and you can still watch it today and enjoy it. The other Space Jam, I would have to say I fell asleep midway through it, so I really can't rate it.
Yeah, but we haven't had the Academy Awards yet, Dan. So let's see what they say.
Beautiful.
Let's see what the experts say first. Yeah.
Oh,
Dan, one quick question. Mark, can I have one quick question
Yeah, certainly.
on James? A bit of talk out here, whether it's more hope, is that LeBron James's son may come out here and play national basketball. Anything in relation to that in America, Dan, or will he be going into the college system?
Well, he's reported to limit his teams to limited to 3 college teams. He's gotten down to his last 3 choices. There, but that does not mean or one of them. That does not mean that he is he'll take it. I mean, as we found before, you see kids now that will commit to college or say they're going to college that will come down to Australia, play a year or play over in Europe a year and then bounce back. And now you've also got the G League. The Ignite team in Las Vegas is a pretty strong team. They've actually probably got the number 1 overall pick playing on that team right now. So again, you've got opportunities to go outside of college in basketball. You got many different forays now, and it will be interesting to see where he ultimately ends up. But
wasn't the strong word going to be the Nike College?
Yes, that is very much the point. And obviously, the last 10 days have really been focused on those 3 teams, and he's looking to narrow it down to. But he's not at the level of LeBron. Obviously, I think a lot of it has a lot to do with his name at this point.
Yeah.
And Dan, you mentioned the potential number 1 draft pick that's got live coverage through America. He's fairly impressive.
Yes, he is. Absolutely.
And Professor, we haven't mentioned Air Force in the football, Professor.
Mm.
yeah, they had a very, very good season, didn't they, Dan?
That they did. Yeah, it was fun to watch some out west football. And obviously, I'm a definite fan of Air Force and the Air Force Academy. So again, another great season by Troy Calhoun and that team in Colorado Springs.
All right. Now, Gelding, we better come to you to close the show as always. One thing you wanted to get, you had a bit of a bee in your bonnet about the stewards.
Oh, well, Professor, there's the stewards, are the policemen of reports. You sent us reports. Jockey gave a report about a horse's condition that we were on. We thought it was a fairly ordinary ride by that person. It ran last, and she reported to the stewards, the horse has come to the end of its preparation, and she just went, that's fine. Then we had on Friday, Cranbourne Races abandoned, what was it, Professor? 6 minutes before the first race?
Yes.
Because the track was heavy in certain spots. One of the stewards' main duties when they get on track is to check the track to make sure it's safe to ride. So we don't know what's happened there.
Gelding,
Gelding,
one of the things that was raised around the stewards walking the track was that they just look at certain patches. They don't walk the entire track. Now, several years ago, there were people track walking.
Yeah.
They are no longer employed, or they no longer work. So the jockeys do it themselves, and hence why 6 minutes out, the jockeys raised the concerns. Now, my understanding is that the club knew there was an issue, but didn't raise it with the stewards.
Right. Well, the club give the first rating in the morning, but as I said, stewards' main jobs are to run the meeting. They have total control of it. The first thing they do when they get there is look at the track to make sure that it's safe, and it's a correct rating, and they can give it a rating, right? Then their second job is to make sure every horse is given a possibility to win a race. The third job is to make sure jockeys aren't betting, and
Oh,
I don't know whether they're doing any of those three, are they?
well, haven't we just had a jockey suspended for a significant period?
Yep.
Yeah.
Why can't jockeys bet on their own horses?
Hey?
Why can't jockeys bet on their own horses?
The rule of racing is that they're not allowed to bet. Full stop on any horse.
Well, that seems to pull that one up. Gelding, have you got any tips for us for today?
Well, Professor, one quick question for the judge.
He's not here. He had to leave.
Hey?
He's not here. He had to leave.
Oh, or maybe one for the legal experts on the panel.
Yeah. Where are they?
Bottom right.
There was a horse yesterday in race 1, Professor, UTIP, Princess Rahini's, and it managed to get third and pay $2.10, which was a great result. And that was despite the ride of the jockey to try to get beaten and to run last. I think I received a phone call from yourself, Professor, to say that. Now, if I employ an electrician or a carpenter to do work on my house and their work is negligent or faulty, Professor,
Subpar.
I'm able to, hey?
Or subpar.
Yeah, I'm able to sue them, aren't I? For not providing proper job.
Yeah, or not pay them.
Or not pay them. Why can't owners or punters sue jockeys when their ride is purely negligent? And I take our phone call where you said that horse probably should have won. So the difference in the ride for the owners who got third placing, and they'll get 15,000. If it had a won, they would have got 85,000. So they're 70,000 out of pocket, Professor, because of what we thought was a ride that left a lot to be desired and certainly did not give the horse every possibility to win the race. I don't know whether you saw a steward's report, Professor.
No, I haven't had a chance to look at the steward's report, Gelding.
I was going to say legally, if it was possible, Slater and Gordon would have done it by now. So you can draw from that. It isn't possible under the rules, I would say. I think it's buyer beware.
Oh, well, maybe that's a bit of the case. But anyway, Professor.
Gelding, perhaps if you give some tips for the day, and I will have a look at the steward's report and report to you before we end the show.
All rightio, Professor. We'll go quickly today. Geelong meeting. Let's hope the jockeys ride them all well and they haven't put too much water on the track. So we'll go race 1, number 9, Zelina Warrior. Then we'll go race 4, number 6, Guzmo. And then race 5, number 5, very much in the legal profession, the claimant, Professor.
The claimant, Omen
the
Bet.
Claimant. So that might be the Omen Bet after our discussions today. And also one in Benalla for our listeners, which is being run at the moment. Race 3, number 5, Adret. And as I'm sitting there, the horse is sitting 4th, well held coming around the turn. So I'll be able to report how Adret went soon, Professor. Looking for a run, or, well, the jockey may have missed the beat, but it's now, yeah, we're going to run 3rd, Professor. The jockey missed the opening.
I tell you this, Gelding, I'd rather face the stewards than you, I reckon.
Yeah, I was just thinking
if
the
I had a
same.
choice between room A or room B and the B's got the gelding in it, you'd see me knock down the A door like a Pamplona bull.
Well,
all right, gentlemen, a great return for 2023. Thanks, Dan, for making the time to be with us. We really appreciate it. Love to see you.
back, Dan.
Let me be back, boys.
Gelding,
Let me be back.
Gelding, I can advise that I've read the 2-line steward's report and there's nothing in it that would make you happy. or me. And it's good afternoon to you all until the next time we meet.
So,
Good afternoon, all.